Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Just last week, there was an ICE raid out at a farm in Camarillo that resulted in hundreds of arrests and even the rescue of migrant children. Now, to no one's surprise, this sparked protests and national outrage and even gunfire. However, this raid sparked more questions than just about immigration policy. Now, there's a spotlight on the questions of child labor, human trafficking, and our state's responsibility to protect children. We are going to cover all of that today, as well as how this raid connects to recent legislation passed in California. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information about sources used in compiling today's episode, then you should check out my corresponding article on my website, linked below. So, just what happened in Camarillo? Well, last Thursday, ICE conducted a raid out in Ventura County at what's known as Glass House Farms, and this is actually a marijuana farm. Originally, ICE officers had a warrant to go and arrest illegal immigrants who were working at this farm, and as they were there, they also uncovered instances of human trafficking found in the fact that there were 14 minors who were forced to work on this farm illegally. Nearly 400 illegal immigrants were arrested, and many of them had extensive rap sheets, including crimes like kidnapping, child molestation, rape, serial burglary, and hit and runs. But the most shocking result is, again, those children who were found to have been forced into child labor. Customs and Border Patrol Commissioner Rodney Scott posted on X that almost all of the minors were unaccompanied and that one was even as young as 14 years old. Now, this raid sparked more protests. In a matter of hours, nearly 500 protesters were at the farm. They were standing in front of the trucks as ICE was trying to leave. They were throwing rocks. They even were breaking windows. And one protester even fired a gun at ICE officers. And so now he is on the run and officials are looking for him. And ultimately, these protesters were arguing that these raids were overkill, that ICE is terrorizing local workers who just work on farms and do the type of labor that Americans don't want to do. And even officials as high up as Gavin Newsom were lamenting the fact that there were children involved. And now, I just can't stress enough again that we need to be looking at the facts of the actual people who are involved in this raid, namely the illegal immigrants who have these extensive criminal backgrounds for things like kidnapping and rape. So these are not just your average hardworking immigrants who are here trying to build a better life. These are people with criminal histories and backgrounds and that pose a direct threat to our communities and the very children that Gavin Newsom is saying that he is so concerned about. But I want to focus on that claim because the claim is that children are having their parents ripped away from them, that as illegal immigrants are being arrested by ICE and being deported, presumably, that children are being left behind. But what's interesting is that the only children who are present in this case are the ones who were actually rescued by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and were actually taken out of a situation where they were being forced to work illegally on this farm alongside men who had all of these crimes like child molestation and rape in their backgrounds. And the only reason that children are involved at all is because of the bad immigration policies that we saw put in place for the past 4 years under the Biden administration. I mean, there are 300,000 immigrant children who went missing and were completely unaccounted for. And they didn't just go missing into good situations. They went missing into situations like these, where they're directly being trafficked or forced to work. And who knows what other unfortunate situations many of them have ended up in. So in this case, ICE actually uncovered something far worse than just bad immigration policy, and they did more important work than just arresting illegal immigrants. They also uncovered a scheme of child and human trafficking, and that is a really big issue in California that we need to talk about. This story and this issue is so sobering for me because I don't live that far from Camarillo. And so to think that there have been times that I have driven through it and just passed by farms just like these where there was human trafficking actually occurring and there were children who were being forced to work illegally is just amplifies the fact that this kind of thing is happening in our neighborhoods and in our communities in California. And we need to wake up and be aware of it. And really, this is not the worst of what's happening in our state. California has a huge human and sex trafficking crisis on its hands. For example, California consistently records the highest number of human trafficking cases in the United States. In 2023, California identified 1,128 human trafficking cases involving over 2,000 victims, and that was the highest across the entire country. In 2021, California accounted for 13% of all trafficking cases, And that continues a trend from previous years where the state is consistently either first or at the top in states across the nation. Lastly, sex trafficking makes up nearly 9 in 10, or about 89% of reported cases of human trafficking, and the majority of those victims are female. This means that human trafficking is not something that happens just somewhere else. Again, it's in our communities, it's in farms that we drive by, it's in stores, it's in homes, it's directly around us. And unless we start to recognize it and speak up about it, it will be allowed to perpetuate and go on unaddressed. But simply knowing about it is not doing enough to actually address it. We need real, actionable, and legislative change. And so that brings us to a very important bill that was passed just last month in California, Assembly Bill 379. This bill was introduced as a response to certain gaps in California's laws around human trafficking, specifically around sex trafficking. So this bill proposed that any adult who solicited sex from a minor would be automatically charged with a felony, no matter the circumstances. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why hasn't that specific action, soliciting sex from a minor, been a felony in the past? And if you're asking that, you are not alone, because I too was wondering, why has this not been a felony this entire time? And thankfully, one of our senators, Senator Shannon Grove, also asked that question in the fall of last year. So before September of 2024, which is just super recent, under the California Penal Code, any adult who solicited, offered, or engaged in commercial sex with someone under 18, even with the knowledge of that person's age, was charged with a misdemeanor for that action. So that means that the repercussions of that crime are less than a year in jail, and county jail, not state prison. And on top of that, they could only be fined up to $10,000. Let me just repeat that. In California, it has been the law of the land that adults, full-on adults, can solicit sex from minors who they know are children and they know are underaged. And that action of buying sex from a child would only be classified as a misdemeanor, and they could only be punished with potentially a less than a year in jail and also maybe a fine of up to $10,000. That is ridiculous. Now, the reasoning for why this was a misdemeanor was that prosecutors could also stack on other charges. So if someone is soliciting sex from a minor, then they could also probably be charged with something like statutory rape. And so those are going to carry more serious sentences. And so most likely all of those charges would be attached. But regardless of that, the action of an adult soliciting sex from a minor shouldn't just be morally objectionable. It should also have legal consequences tied to it that should be really harsh in what should be an orderly and civilized society. So Senator Grove agrees with this sentiment. And so back in September of 2024, she passed Senate Bill 1414. This bill, as originally written, would make soliciting sex from any minor under 18 for any reason automatically a felony. And that means that the penalties tied to it would be 2 to 4 years in state prison, up to $25,000 in fines, and it would mean that that person would be automatically placed on the sex offender registry, which just feels like a requirement that should be automatic if you are someone who is soliciting sex from a child. Any adult who's doing that should just be placed on that registry. So the good news is that that bill did pass, but the bad news is that it actually passed with so many amendments that it ended up not really achieving the goal that Senator Grove set out to achieve by introducing it. These changes were made by the Senate Public Safety Committee, ironically, and they consisted of some severely drastic change to the original language. So the first change was they removed the strict liability clause. So that means that the person who's accused of doing this action actually has to know that the person that they were soliciting sex from is a minor. So no longer is it just if you're an adult and you solicited sex from someone under 18, now it's a felony. Now they have to show that that person knew that the child that they were soliciting from was actually underage. The second change was that it actually made the offense a wobbler. And what that means is that it could classify as a felony, but it also could classify as a misdemeanor. And it's just up to the interpretation of the court. It's up to the prosecutor of how aggressively they want to go after it and how well they think that they can make their case. So essentially, the bill set out to mandate that anytime an adult solicits sex from a minor, it's automatically a felony. And basically, this amendment completely torched that entire idea. Now, it's not automatically a felony. It just could be a felony, or it could be a misdemeanor, as it has been for the past however many decades. Now, in case you think that those two changes are bad enough, it gets even worse. So it also limited felony eligibility to cases involving minors who are under 16 years old. So 16 and 17-year-olds are not eligible to be felonies. They are only misdemeanors. The only time that this case against a 16 or 17-year-old could potentially be a felony is if they have solid proof of additional trafficking. And so now the burden really has shifted onto the prosecutors to be able to prove further evidences of trafficking situations, which I think that soliciting sex from a minor for money should be enough evidence that some sort of trafficking is occurring, but apparently not according to the Senate Public Safety Committee. And so now that means that pretty much all cases in instances with 16s and 17-year-olds are not going to be felonies. They're just going to be misdemeanors. And lastly, what I think is just a terrible amendment to this bill is that registration for sex offender status only triggers under narrow conditions. So there are plenty of situations where you could be an adult, you could solicit sex from a minor, and you're not even put on the sex offender registry. How insane is that? So just to paint the picture for you very tangibly, in California, under the law, there could be a 50-year-old man soliciting sex from a 13-year-old girl. And because of the wobbler sort of amendment, that could only be classified as a misdemeanor. He could not have to register as a sex offender, and he could not be charged at all if he claims that he didn't know that the girl was a minor. Does that sound like California is really doing its best to prevent and protect victims of human trafficking? So that was last year, but we need to get back to this year with Assembly Bill 379. And essentially, this bill is trying to close the gaps on Senate Bill 1414. It's trying to propose changes so that, once again, anytime an adult solicits sex from a minor, it's automatically classified as a felony. But just as it happened with Senate Bill 1414, this bill also just passed recently, which seems like it would be good news, but it passed with some rather large amendments that really watered down what the bill was trying to do. So let's start with the good news. Assembly Bill 379 does make it so that children who are under 16, if sex is solicited from them by adults, that is automatically a felony. So that's good news. It essentially took away the wobbler provision that was in Senate Bill 1414. However, there are some rather large amendments that were made to the 16 and 17-year-old provisions when originally the bill was trying to protect those groups. So the largest carve-out exception was to say that an offense would only be charged as a felony in cases of 16 and 17-year-olds if the adult who was doing the trafficking or the solicitation of sex was older than them by 3 years. So any sort of 3-year age gap will not classify as a felony. And then on top of that, it also raises the burden of proof once again on the prosecutors and says that there still has to be evidence of trafficking for the 16 and 17-year-olds, even if you have a larger age gap than the 3 years. So that requirement still stands. So let's make this tangible with a few examples. Let's say that a 35-year-old solicits sex from a 13-year-old. Now, that case would automatically be a felony. It's done under California law, and that is good news under this new Assembly bill. However, let's say that the minor is actually 17. So now it's a 35-year-old soliciting sex from a 17-year-old. That would still be a felony because the age gap is greater than 3 years. However, now the burden of proof again shifts to the prosecutor, and so they have to have evidence of trafficking in order for it to be a felony, or else it will be reduced to a misdemeanor. Now, let's change the ages again. Let's say that the adult is actually 20. So we have a 17-year-old minor and we have a 20-year-old. That would not be a felony under California law because the age gap is only 3 years. It's not greater than 3 years, and so that would be a misdemeanor. Now, in reality, none of these situations are okay or should be seen as okay, but they can all be treated differently under California law because we refuse to pass legislation that just blanketly says that if an adult is soliciting sex from anyone who is a minor, that is automatically a felony. Now, this opens the door to one very dangerous situation, and unfortunately, it's a very likely one to be used by people who are actually trying to engage in human or sex trafficking. Let's say that a 40-year-old man targets a 17-year-old girl. And let's say that he starts to groom her. He starts to engage with her. Maybe he reaches out to her over social media. He texts her. He talks to her. He doesn't directly buy sex from her, but now he actually solicits a younger man, maybe a 20-year-old, to actually be the buyer. That buyer is only 2 to 3 years older than her, and so that would only be classified as a misdemeanor. But the 40-year-old who's actually behind the scenes could be taking a cut of the money. He could be running multiple girls in this type of scheme, and so he could be profiting off of this entire situation, and yet he's completely protected because he's out of it, and even if he's in it, it's only misdemeanors that are actually going to be happening if law enforcement gets involved. But the danger here is that the older trafficker can still be controlling the girl's movements. He could be controlling her phone. He could be really manipulative, and yet he's able to legally distance himself from the situation. This is the very dangerous loophole that this bill creates, and it's really making it ineffective in California to prevent, to catch, and to punish sex traffickers. So why does understanding these bills in our state really matter? I would argue that most people don't know that these are the laws in place in California. And unfortunately, when we don't know about them and we don't raise awareness to them, we can't change them. And so traffickers and criminals can thrive in the dark because there's no light that's being shown on them. California legislators and key representatives in our government, like Governor Gavin Newsom, like to say that they care about children and families. And we see that with this ICE raid. We see that they're very quick to lament tearing apart families. We see that they're quick to lament children crying at the thought of being separated from their parents. But when they have a chance to make actionable, real legislative change that would save children, they're ineffective. They won't do it. They won't go as far as actually saying that these actions are wrong and they will be punished as such. So it's left us to question, which is it? Do they actually care about children, or are they just using performative politics in order to appease their base and not look too out of touch? Virtue signaling doesn't do anything in words alone. Only action matters. And here's the key point that I really want to make. This issue shouldn't be partisan. When an ICE raid is conducted and there are children who are found in these conditions, children without adults accompanying them, children who are helpless and can't stand up for themselves, children who are being forced into labor or in trafficking situations, no party should think that that is acceptable. We should all want to stand up for children in those situations. So the focus shouldn't be on why was ICE raiding this farm. The focus should be on why were their children there? Why were they working there? Why were they forced to be there? What were their current conditions? Who is in charge there? And how are we going to hold them accountable? Likewise, when it comes to the laws in our state around human and sex trafficking, Republicans and Democrats alike should be able to work together to pass the strictest laws in our state that absolutely defend and protect the children of California. The only right side to be on is the side that protects kids. And if our laws don't actually reflect that, then all of the outrage that we're seeing being demonstrated today doesn't matter. Before you go, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Connected Care. Connected Care is an online therapy platform making quality mental health support more accessible than ever. Whether you're dealing with anxiety, depression, or just feeling overwhelmed, Connected Care connects you with licensed professionals who truly want to help. They also offer medical support if medication is part of your plan. And if you're a provider, they handle the administrative components for you, like billing, credentialing, insurance, and so much more, so that you can focus on your clients without the administrative burnout. Get started today at connectedcareinc.com. That's connectedcareinc.com, because no one should face mental health challenges alone. And thanks to Connected Care, you don't have to. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you even learned something new. Please spread the word and share this show with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of The California Conversation.